Welcome to this edition of Head to Head. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode number 228 of the podcast. And on this episode, I am talking about Aroldis Chapman and Craig Kimbrel being left off of their respective playoff team rosters. These are two guys who were once thought of to be the two best relievers in all of Major League Baseball. And since 2012, Craig Kimbrel has 347 saves and Aroldis Chapman has 312. That's the second and third most saves in that time period. Only Kenley Jansen has more with 382. Yet both Kimbrel and Chapman have each been left off their team's respective playoff rosters. Let's start with Aroldis Chapman, who during the season lost his closer role with the Yankees. He had only 9 saves this season after having 33 of the last 5 seasons, and for the first time ever had an ERA over 4 at 4.56. This situation has escalated after Chapman did not show up to a workout and both manager Aaron Boone and general manager Brian Cashman questioned his effort level during this season. This is not the first time Chapman has had an off-the-field issue. The reliever was suspended for domestic violence. One of the biggest reasons he wasn't outright released by the New York Yankees this season is because he's baseball's highest paid relief pitcher at $18 million a year. If Chapman were any good this year, he would have been on the Yankees playoff roster. This is a guy who played a big part in the Chicago Cubs winning their first World Series in over a century. Chapman is not on the Yankees roster because he's not the Chapman we've been used to watching this past decade. The Craig Kimbrel situation is more interesting. Kimbrel had 22 saves this season with the Dodgers, which isn't great, but the Dodgers are a great team that doesn't play in a lot of close games. This is the Dodgers basically saying they no longer care about the old school closer who gets the last 3 outs in the 9th inning. The team also did just walk away from longtime closer Kenley Jansen, who's now on the Atlanta Braves. Chapman and Kimbrel are two of the last closers who are big names. A majority of teams have a closer that most baseball fans have never heard of. I grew up in the era of Mariano Rivera with the Yankees, Trevor Hoffman with the San Diego Padres, Francisco Rodriguez with the LA Angels and the Mets, Billy Wagner with the Astros and the Mets, Joe Nathan with the Minnesota Twins, Jonathan Papelbon with the Boston Red Sox. Like, these guys were major stars in the game of Major League Baseball. It used to feel like the closer was a rock star. We've all seen the movie Major League when Charlie Sheen's character goes in to get the last out of that movie and Wild Thing is playing. That's how being a closer used to feel like. You used to feel like they were rock stars, larger than life figures. And most really good baseball teams had an elite one. Now there's like one really great closer, and that's Edwin Diaz with the Mets, who is going to be a free agent this offseason. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of money Edwin Diaz gets this offseason. I think the Mets are going to pay him, but he is a dying breed, and I think that makes him more valuable than ever. Or does it? Because it doesn't feel like the Dodgers are going to be in on getting Edwin Diaz on their team. My Boston Red Sox went an entire season without having a closer. Are they now going to put in big money into the position they didn't care about for an entire season? Baseball bullpens used to be all about one guy, the guy who is closing the 9th inning. Nowadays, every team has an unlimited amount of hard throwers, so none of them feel special anymore. Remember when Aroldis Chapman first came into the big leagues? It was all about how unique his velocity was. Now no one cares if you throw 100 miles per hour because there are a lot of guys who can do that. I also remember that when Chapman was first coming on, there was all this talk about if the Reds should make him a starting pitcher. Remember, those used to be the two positions you could be if you were a pitcher in baseball. You would either be a starting pitcher who could throw 5 or 6 or 7 innings, or you could be a closer who throws the 9th inning. Now there's so much more to being a pitcher in today's Major League Baseball. You don't have to do those old school roles anymore. You don't have to be a starting pitcher who can go deep into a game, and you don't just have to be the 9th inning specialist. There's so much more. Bullpens are loaded nowadays. You can be the closer one day, and you can be the guy who pitches the 6th inning the next. And I feel like we forget this. The lifetime of the 9th inning specialist has not been that long. There It wasn't that long ago that closers used to throw multiple innings, guys like Raleigh Fingers and Goose Gossage. It wasn't until Tony La Russa used Dennis Eckersley exclusively in the ninth, and it has been that way for closers ever since. Growing up watching Mariano Rivera made me come to the conclusion that the best pitcher in the bullpen should be the guy who comes out of the ninth inning. What made me change my opinion of it is what happened with the Cleveland Indians with Andrew Miller. The way Terry Francona used Andrew Miller to pitch multiple innings a night and get them to go to the World Series convinced me that maybe the closer was going to change forever. It was that moment that I realized, wow, baseball is never going to be the same, because obviously there's more value in Andrew Miller throwing 3 shutout innings than even the best closer only able to throw 1 shutout inning. It's clear mathematics. It's like the NBA with the 3-pointers. 3 points is more than 2 points, so that's why Steph Curry is more valuable than the guy who's the best dunker in the NBA. We all just blindly for decades believed that the most important inning in a baseball game was the 9th inning, and it's almost like we ignored innings 1 through 8. Or, like I said before, we used to have these pitchers that could pitch 7 innings. Well, if you don't have that pitcher anymore, you have to have a deeper bullpen than just the guy in the 9th inning. That's why the 6th, 7th, and 8th have become more important than ever, because the average starting pitcher is only going 5 innings now. You're not getting deep. There's no more complete games happening. You need to have a stacked bullpen. It can't all be about one guy the way it used to be with Aroldis Chapman on the Reds and Craig Kimbrel with the Braves and Red Sox. The reason the Dodgers don't want to use Craig Kimbrel is because they don't want to guarantee they have to use him every 9th inning with a 3-run lead. They don't want their season to end with one guy, especially a guy in Kimbrel who has been shaky in the postseason with a 4.13 ERA. His career ERA is 2.31. Teams used to live and die with their closer. I remember that epic play-in game between the Colorado Rockies and the San Diego Padres where Trevor Hoffman blew the lead. That's how your season would end. I have my best pitcher and I'm going to put him in that situation no matter what. That is not where we are at with modern day baseball. And analytics definitely plays a big part in this. Remember in 2004 when the Yankees had that epic collapse? Well, Mariano Rivera was very bad in that series, but the Yankees were riding with him because he was Mariano Rivera. He had the cachet of being the closer and the best reliever on the team. I am saying in today's baseball, the Yankees would have stopped using Mariano Rivera in that series. They do not ride the bad hand. They ride the hot hand in today's game. And a lot of that has to do with bullpens being deeper. I mean, in 2004, the Yankees had no other options. They had to use Mariano Rivera. Their season had to ride on him because he was the guy. Now, bullpens are stacked. There are numerous guys on these teams who are very good. It used to be a big deal if a closer lost their job, and here is a guy in Craig Kimbrel with the 7th most saves all time, and he's not even a member of the Dodgers postseason roster, and it's because no one cares about that position anymore. The save stat is no longer valued. It's similar to the win. These are things that define you as a pitcher, if you were good or not, and now nobody looks at them. They're looking at the strikeouts, and they're looking at the ERA. Also, when it comes to Chapman and Kimbrel, it's not like these two are super old. Both are just 34 years old, and I think both of their biggest issues is they cannot accept a job that isn't the closer position. Both are really bad when they are used as set of men. Just look at Kimbrel last year with the Chicago White Sox. He could not accept any position that wasn't the closer's role because he's been trained to believe that the save is this amazing thing that everyone cares about, and they used to. I remember when Francisco Rodriguez was basically saving every game for the LA Angels, and it was a big deal. This guy was becoming the most saves in a season leader, and it was a big deal. Remember Eric Gagne, the most consecutive saves ever without blowing a save. These are special things that we're never going to see again because closers are not used in that same way. Nowadays, if you blow 3 saves, you lose the position, and we don't even make a big deal about it because no one cares about the closer position. It's basically become extinct. It's not rare that 2 used to be elite relievers are at the end of their careers. What what's rare is there is no one there to replace them. There are no longer star closers. Josh Hader and Liam Hendricks, for example, are two very good pitchers, but they are not huge names, and you can't pencil them in for 30-plus saves for a decade. That's what the closer position used to be. That's what I'm talking about. Yes, there are still going to be guys who have a 40-save season, but you won't be able to pencil that guy in for 30-plus saves over the next decade because no one values that position like they used to. No team is going to sign off of having the same guy be their closer for a decade now. You're never going to see that again. I feel like these guys are a dying breed. For almost a decade, the Cincinnati Reds relied on Aroldis Chapman and the Atlanta Braves relied on Craig Kimbrel through the ups and downs. Now those teams don't do that anymore. And a lot of people think this has to do with the save statistic. It is a really dumb stat if you think about it. So if a pitcher comes into the ninth inning with a 3-run lead and gets 3 outs, he gets a save. That sounds pretty easy to do. I mean, you have to be terrible to blow that save. I truly believe that people's position on the closer changed all because of the postseason. The postseason is when it matters most, and I think there have been too many big-name closers who didn't matter when it came to postseason time. Mariano Rivera was thought of as the greatest closer of all time because he was elite during the postseason. I think teams have learned that you can win a World Series without having an elite closer. Remember, the Houston Astros won the World Series because they were using their elite pitchers, like their starters out of the bullpen, like Justin Verlander. During the Red Sox winning the World Series, Nathan Eovaldi was 1,000 times more valuable than Craig Kimbrel. When was the last time a team won the World Series and we were all like, they won that because of their closer? I can't name it. It was probably the Yankees in the 90s with Rivera. Teams have been having success with different kinds of pitchers. Madison Bumgarner with the Giants comes to mind. Aroldis Chapman was very good when the Cubs won the World Series, but no one would give him the credit of being the reason the Cubs won. The postseason is the place where people have questioned, does the closer position matter at all? Because it's funny, I mean, Craig Kimbrel gets these 22 saves during the regular season. He gets this mindless stat that nobody cares about, and then when the postseason comes, immediately the Dodgers leave him off of their roster because they don't care about saves anymore. They care about winning a World Series, and they feel like they have the best chance to do that with arms that are not Craig Kimbrel. The Brewers basically told you how they feel about the closer position when they traded Josh Hader in the middle of trying to make the postseason. Now, the Brewers did not make the postseason, but still, they just got rid of this guy in the middle of trying to make it because they don't value that ninth inning closer position. And they're not alone. I mean, these regular season saves don't mean anything. No one cares that Mariano Rivera is the all-time saves leader. The reason we care about Mariano Rivera is because he was dynamite in the postseason with the exception of 2001 and 2004. If Rivera had all of those saves with 0 World Series rings, we would not care about the name Mariano Rivera. The reason we cared about him is because of the postseason. These other pitchers with these all-time great saves numbers are lacking postseason success. Aroldis Chapman is kind of lacking postseason success outside of his short tenure with the Cubs. Craig Kimbrel is lacking postseason success. I used to think both Kimbrel and Chapman had Hall of Fame chances. Now there's no way either get in because the people who will be voting don't value closers or saves. Kimbrel has a better chance than Chapman, but both will be left out of the Hall. And there are far better closers that have been left out of the Hall of Fame. Francisco Rodriguez has the most saves in the history of baseball in a single season, yet he didn't make the Hall of Fame, and the same for Billy Wagner. Billy Wagner was a strikeout machine, and for the longest time he didn't make the Hall of Fame because of his lack of appearances. Really, I'm just left wondering, what would a modern reliever have to do to make the Hall of Fame? No one can answer that question because at the end of these careers, what are we going to look at? I mean, I think Andrew Miller, what he did with the Cleveland Indians, I think that should get you to the Baseball Hall of Fame, in my opinion, because I think what he did there, he led that team to the World Series, something that most modern relievers don't don't do. I mean, does anyone right now think that Liam Hendricks or Edwin Diaz or Josh Hader are going to make the Baseball Hall of Fame? Right now, you'd have to say no, because they've had absolutely no impact of when baseball matters most. The postseason, the Mets had the best closer in all of baseball, yet they lost in the first round because they couldn't use Edwin Diaz because they never really had a lead. I think that's the biggest issue with the position, is you can only use the ninth inning closer, the classic closer, when you have a lead. And I think what we are learning is that the moments that matter most in baseball are when you're down by 1 run or you're only up by 1 run in the 8th inning. This ninth inning specialist is such a niche position. Why did it ever really matter? I think the closer would have died a lot sooner if it had not been for Mariano Rivera being part of a dynasty. I think the Yankees going on that run of 4 World Series in 5 years made everyone believe they had to get an elite closer like that. It made the Red Sox go, we have to get this guy Jonathan Papelbon. It made the Atlanta Braves go, we have to make this Craig Kimbrel guy our closer, because we have to get that kind of guy so that we get into the 9th inning, he shuts them down. Well, the problem is, what if you never get to the 9th inning with a lead? I feel like in today's baseball, the only people that complain about their teams not having closers are the ones that are bad teams. We hear this all this time. If you have a bad baseball team, they always say, oh, they're going closer by committee. If they had just picked one guy, they'd be a lot better. And my counter argument to that is, then why the Dodgers, the team that seemingly wins 100 baseball games a year, is going closer by committee in the postseason? If the closer really matters, why does the best team in baseball no longer care about it? Look at the Yankees. Aroldis Chapman lost his job in the beginning of the season. Remember when in the late 70s they had Sparky Lyle and Goose Gossage, and there was a competition of who the closer would be? It used to matter who held that position. This guy lost this position. Clay Holmes got the position, and no one really cared about it. Now, Clay Holmes was very good for the Yankees this season, but no one really cared that Aroldis Chapman had lost his job. It wasn't something that we all talked about in sports media. It wasn't debated by many people. People used to care about the closer position way more than they do right now. Now there is absolutely no difference between the closer or the average 6th, 7th, or 8th inning pitcher. What's winning in baseball today are these deep bullpens, not these bullpens that heavily rely on one guy doing one thing. I'll leave you with this. It's kind of wild that we've seen the greatest closer ever in Mariano Rivera, and there's zero chance of anyone surpassing him. It's similar to the designated hitter. No one can replace David Ortiz, in part because no one will ever be a DH for as long as he was, and no one will ever be a closing pitcher for as long as Mariano Rivera was, or even as long as Aroldis Chapman or Craig Kimbrel. No one ever will be considered a closer for a decade. That's how long Aroldis Chapman and Craig Kimbrel have been closers, for over a decade. When spring training used to start and the team didn't know who the closer was going to be, it used to be a big deal when the manager announced who his closer is going to be. Now it doesn't matter, because the best teams in baseball are winning without even naming one. Teams used to let their closers fail, like Mariano Rivera could survive having 4 or 5 or even 6 blown saves a season. Now if you name someone the closer and they blow 2 saves in a row, they're in danger of losing their positions. I know a lot of you look at the Craig Kimbrel and Aroldis Chapman situation and go, look, it's no big deal. I don't think it's a big deal that Aroldis Chapman is left off of the Yankees roster. I personally don't think he's very good anymore. The same with Craig Kimbrel. I think the big deal is the closer position is probably dying with both of these two players, because they are a dying breed, and I think it's ending with them. I don't think you're ever going to see pitchers like them again. I'm really interested to see what a relief pitcher looks like in 4 to 5 years, and I'm also really interested to see if we ever put a modern pitcher in the Hall of Fame. What does a relief pitcher have to do to be a Hall of Famer? Because I don't think Aroldis Chapman is making the Hall of Fame, and I don't think Craig Kimbrel is making the Hall of Fame. But if they don't make the Hall of Fame, who is going to make the Hall of Fame? Relief pitchers don't last in one role as long as they used to, and that role, the closer, doesn't exist anymore. Thanks for listening to this edition of Head to Head. I'm Cam McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please rate, review, and subscribe.